RingCentral likes to do this thing where it picks the microphone and camera in my closed laptop, so nobody can hear anything. I don't know why it does that when I have like a dedicated camera on top of the computer, but computers are the worst. Okay, so what I've got here is a brand new Cake application I just generated with Composer. See that right there, that was pretty fun. And what I've got here is the app local file. All I've done so far is put in the database connections. I'm using SQLite because I really like SQLite. I think it's a great database if you only have one web server, or if you're doing local stuff. It's awesome for prototyping because if you script the database, you just delete the file and start over. Okay, so what we're going to do is kind of, I have a couple topics I want to go through. First is kind of go through an application that we're going to, brain's not working. Okay, going through an application, we're going to generate two models with migrations. So just this really simple database with migrations. It's going to have users and calendar items. The calendar items are just going to be kind of like minimal calendar items that maybe you would find from Google Calendar or something like that. Users can have many calendars, so basic association, but we're not going to do too much with the ORM. Instead, what we're going to be doing is building an API endpoint and doing content type negotiation with that. So I'm going to look at a couple new features that got released in Cake 4.4. So that's content type negotiation, new improvements to error handling, and database schema management, because that got a lot easier. And so I want to showcase that because I think for me, it's one of a big productivity win, because I hate the static schema in test fixtures. It drives me crazy. So yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to generate a migration. We're going to call it create tables, right? Of course, that didn't work. Right. All right, so we generated a migration. I'm just going to copy and paste some schema from stuff I made earlier. So you don't have to watch me type it all out because I type really slow. All right, so what I've got here, if you're looking for the code for this, it can be found in my GitHub account at Mark Story, typing thing again, CakeFest 2022. So if you're looking for the code of like the finished result, minus any questions or deviations we make during this workshop, that's the code that'll be there. At the end of the workshop, I'll update it with the code we did make during the workshop in a separate branch, so that you have both like the stuff I prepared ahead of time and the stuff that we made during this workshop. If you have any questions, you can ask them in chat, ask them in the Q&A. I'll do my best to answer them as I go. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking of doing. Let's go move some windows around so I can see things. Wait. Okay. And you'll also see me type :M a lot. I just switched my keyboard, and my keyboard has a mouse built into it, and the way I get to my mouse buttons is with colon. So if you see me typing :M all the time, it's not because I'm doing something bizarre, it's just I can't use my mouse yet. Okay, so we have the users table, very simple calendar items. We're going to assume that they are attached to a user, that they have title, description, they have a start time and an end time, or if they're like a full day event, they have a start date and an end date. And what we're going to do with this is now we're going to run this migration. Great. And then we created our table. We can see that with SQLite's little client. It's like app.sqlite, I think what I called it. And we can do schema. So there's our two tables. We can do schema on users. Schema on users. Okay, schema. Okay. Let's see our tables, which is weird. Okay, so we have the table. The table's there. What's in the Finks log? It says it did it, but it didn't. Okay. Don't do that. We're just going to delete the app.sqlite. So it says it made the tables. We'll just assume that they're there. Okay, so now we're going to try and do bin cake bake model. It says we have users, so we'll get calendar items. One for users. That'll just get us like some basic schema. So now we have like a table users. Right? You've all done this probably hundreds of times. So yeah, that's kind of the models we're going to be using. And then we also have fixtures. So let's look at our fixtures. So our fixtures currently have no schema. This is a big change in Cake 4. So previously, in previous versions of Cake, what would happen is this fixture would contain all of the schema for the table. And then if you wanted to update the schema, what you would have to do is also remember to update all these fixture files. And this is obnoxious. But it was the way it worked for a really long time. There were some benefits to it. You could like test schema before you did it. But it was just a lot of tedious work, which I didn't really love. And so thankfully, Juan Pablo came to us during the release, during the development of Cake 4.4, and offered to contribute a plugin that he had done or that he had worked on with a couple other folks to automatically use to apply migrations at the beginning of a test run. So what would happen is you run the tests, the test runner will automatically run your database migrations from the start to the beginning. It will also detect, using the Finks log in that test database, it'll detect if there are new migrations or changed migrations. And if you have added a migration or the head of the migration tree and the head of where Finks thinks the migrations should be differs, what the test database test migration runner will do is drop all the tables and start over. So this lets you kind of like switch branches really easily and update migrations. As long as you don't reuse migration numbers or migration names across your branches, you'll be in a much better shape. As for how all of that works, if you're updating your existing application, there's now this migrations test suite migrator, and what it does is pretty obvious. It just runs migrations. And the way you kind of use it is you do new migrator run. And what that'll do is it'll run all of the app migrations. And there's additional arguments to run migrations for plugins. If you have plugins that have migrations, you can do all of that inside of here as well. Pretty sure this run takes a list of options. So you have options to skip tables, and there's also options for running plugins. I think, yeah, somewhere in here. Another thing you can do, if you're not using Cake's migrations, you have some other migration tool. What you can do, and what I suggest you do, is build a bridge from whatever your migration tool is into the test suite, so that at the beginning of the test run, the test runner can run all of your migrations. If you're looking for how to do that, look at the migrator code. It has a good kind of template of like how you can do it. What we're doing for the core test, because we can't use migrations, this is another thing you could use, but it's kind of, again, more tedious to maintain, is loading a SQL dump file. If you have things that can't be represented through Cake's migrations, or you can't use Finks, or you're using SQL dumps for some reason, you can always dump your schema into your application code and then load that whole schema file, like if you're using views or triggers, things that migrations can't really do very well. So you can do that as well. There's also like an abstract schema format that you can load. We use that for the core test because we don't have migrations and we have to run tests against 5 different kinds of databases. If your application happens to be in that scenario, yeah, you can use the abstract schema, but you probably already have existing tools if you have multiple schema files that you're using. So now we're going to generate another migration just to see that, well, actually we'll run PHP unit first. And we should see our migrations get run. And we have to run it with verbose to get that. So what we're going to do is generate another migration. And we'll start off with writing a couple tests. So we're just going to go into our test for calendar items. So you still have to load fixtures in your test case. The reason you have to do this is so that the test runner knows which tables to truncate at the beginning of the test suite, because you don't want to truncate the whole database, because in a large application this can get really expensive. So you still do have to list out your fixtures. delete all of this. And so what we're just going to do is write a couple like small tests. And just do like query. Calendar items. I'm just going to do all. I'm just going to debug this query. Right? That's not really a query anymore, it's a result. Now if we run that, we can see that we have all the schema that we want, and we have the data from our calendar items fixture. Right? We do that again. It works the way you would, like records work the way you would want. But now if we were to get to kind of generate a new migration, we're going to do, what was the name of that migration? I'm going to show off a neat feature that goes underused, I think. So we're going to call it add. No, stop that autocomplete. Add project ID to calendar items. And then we're going to give it a column name. We're going to give it an int type. We're going to generate a migration for that as well. Now, if we look at our migrations, what we have is we were able to define the whole column inside the command line. So if you just have to add simple columns, or you have to add something small, a column or multiple columns, you can do that all on the command line. You don't have to go and edit the migration afterwards. And once you get comfortable with it, you can not have to spend so much time doing migrations. If you want to know more about that, that format, the help file, the help text for migrations has been improved. So you can see you can drop tables, you can alter tables, you can add fields to users. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but so you can add fields, you can alter columns, you can drop columns. And then there's this idea of like a column grammar. And so you can indicate like the name of the column, the type of the column, whether the column's nullable. The nullable is like a question mark. And you can specify the length for, is it another custom keyword? No, it's a keyboard from a keyboard enthusiast in the Netherlands. His name is Quentin LeBastard. And so he runs a shop called Bastard Keyboards. And so it's one of his keyboards. I wanted to build another custom one, but this was too much work. Anyways, enough about keyboards. I could talk about keyboards way too much. It has a mouse built into the keyboard. It's enough about keyboards, because I'll talk way too much about that. So yeah, you can build columns on the command line, save yourself some time. If you forget, which I always do, so I wrote this help files so that I can remember, because I'm dumb. Okay, so now if we were to run our test again, let's go back to our fixture. Where is it? Here, and we're just going to add project ID in, and we're just going to put 99. It's not a foreign key. We didn't define a foreign key, so it's not a big deal. So now if we look, it has not run our migration. Yeah, it did run our migration, sick. So our migration got run, and it read the data out of the new schema fixture. So that's how migrations work inside of tests. You just write a migration and run your tests. Migration says project ID is a string. Yes, I don't know why it said that. I bet it's because of SQLite. Because, yeah, that's weird. Let's run it again. Project ID is still an int. Bizarre. Maybe I screwed up the migration. Yep. I made it a string. That's probably because when I baked the migration, I put int instead of integer. So we can generate another migration to fix that. We're just going to rm the tests at SQLite. It's one of the beauties of SQLite. kill the whole thing and start over. Invalid column int. Say computer integer. It is running the migrations because it told us that the migration was garbage. There. So I generated the column as a string. Thank you for pointing that out, Martin. And now it's not a string because we fixed it. So we wanted to make another column. We're going to call it, what are we going to call it? We're going to call it completed. No, completed's not a calendar thing. What's something for a calendar? All day is a Boolean, right? Yeah, it's true. Computer's not wrong. All day. New migration all day. So now we have a Boolean. So it's just getting the column types correct, which I had failed to do. And if we wanted to show that nullable mode, we can do that. Yes, delete it. And we'll just make it a nullable column now. Yes. Sometimes you need quotes. No, it doesn't. So now we've made a nullable column. Previously our columns were not nullable. So here's a not nullable. And with the question mark, it becomes a nullable column. Yeah, that's kind of how it goes. And now if we were to run our PHP unit test again, it's gonna, what's it complaining about now? It's complaining that duplicate column exists. Computer's not wrong. And we try again. It works more better. And the column is nullable, so it came out null. So that's kind of the workflow with new fixtures. I quite like it. It's a lot easier for getting stuff done, and really helps with like prototyping, and helps with experimenting, and helps with like just your day-to-day work. So if you haven't switched over to it, hopefully you've seen enough that that it makes sense and you could switch over to it. Okay, so that's all for fixtures and testing. Now we're going to go into content type negotiation. So historically that's been done through request handler. You would install, set up request handler for your controllers, and then you would have to do content type negotiation there, and you'd have to extend the core behavior and add your own view maps in and all of that kind of stuff. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with request handler. It does a lot of good things, but it also becomes this like gravity well of like features. And it does a little bit too much all at once. So what I want to do instead is I'm just going to paste in some code. So we're just going to go in here, we make a new file. And we're just going to start sketching in some code. I'm going to paste it and we're going to talk about it. So I'm cheating here. I'm using a service locator, which we can talk about. We'll talk about quickly next. So we're getting a service injected into our controller through dependency injection. And then we're going to reiter the query for getting includes, which we'll worry about that later. And then we're going to fetch the calendar list. I like named parameters in PHP. I think they work pretty cool. Well worth using. And then we're going to set something to the view. We're going to set serializing, and then we're going to not do any of this. We'll do that later. So what we need to do next is kind of build this calendar view. As for the content type negotiation, admin does not like request handler either. So the way that content type negotiation works with the new subsystem is if your controller defines a view classes method, when the controller goes to auto render, what it'll do is call this view classes method. It'll check to see if your controller implements view classes, and then it'll call view classes, and then each view class has a static method called content type, which allows that view to say what content type it makes. And this allows clients to do content type negotiation. So they can send an accept header that says, I would like to have a JSON response. And then Cake can call the content types, call view classes, check the content type of all those view classes, see if any of them can respond with JSON, and then switch to using that view. So this allows you to do some interesting things, like you can build JSON views with the default JSON view. If you want to build your own custom view JSON view class, which is what we're going to do, you can do that as well. You can also have multiple kind of JSON formats. So some applications, some services will have different versions of JSON, right? And so you can do content type negotiation through, you can do versioning through content type negotiation, which is a system I like. You can also put versions in the header, like in the URL and in the prefix. But if all you're doing is changing like the serialization format, then maybe content type negotiation would work better. Okay, so we have a few things to build now. We have to build this calendar service. We have to build our custom JSON view. So let's build that service first. I like to put services in source service. Once that service directory gets too big, there are other things you can do, but I find this is a good place to put services. We don't have ways to bake services because services are kind of like arbitrary code that your application wants to do. So let's get that calendar service. It's going to paste it all in. Like I said, all of this code is on GitHub, so there's no reason to try and like madly copy it down. Okay, so we're going to go through it line by line and we'll talk about it. So we're going to use an HTTP client. We're going to do some ORM locating. That's what that is. That's an HTTP client. We're going to inject the HTTP client. So this is another way that I like to use service classes, is like if you have application logic that needs to bridge between some sort of network service and the ORM, or if you need to like make reusable application logic that glues, that has multiple ORM interactions together. Services are a great way to do that. Then you don't have like big controller methods. This lets you keep your controllers kind of slim, and lets you keep your application, like the core application logic, outside of the controllers, outside of command line tools, and lets you just use those services inside your command line tools and inside of your controllers. So it kind of gives you a simpler and clearer. Why does it show the errors in red? It's an excellent question. It says I don't have a dot comment. It's cranky that I'm missing a parameter comment. It's salty that there's no return tag. So yeah, those are the errors. I'm going to ignore them. I'm quite used to ignoring these errors. These come from the CakePHP PHP-CS configuration. We have a very like strict documentation standard inside of Cake and inside the core plugins, and we ship that to applications by default. There are ways to turn them off. I've long since forgotten the incantation for how to do that in the XML file, but you can turn off rules inside of here. If folks are interested, I can look that up. I just don't have it committed to memory anymore because I've just conditioned myself to ignore this stuff. It's in a doc block, I don't care. It's the gist of it. We can fix this one by slamming in a parameter for this. Type today. HTTP client. I would also love to get to the place where we can not have the types duplicated here. Like we have the type here. We should probably skip having the type in the parameter doc block. Like that would be a lot nicer. What's it at about now? Yeah. Right. So that's how we make the red go away. And we can just slam a return on this. That's not that important. Okay. So in a world where we were refreshing, we'd go to Google Calendars, fetch the Google Calendar. There's probably also some application set up here to like add an access token, right? But this is a way we could do it. And then down here we could get the table, so we get calendar items. This fetch table. So this is another kind of new method that gives a little bit better ergonomics. And you used to have to do like get table locator get, right? So this get table locator, you have to do something like this and then get like this. And it was just a lot of typing. So I think it was Matt or other query had this idea of like adding in a method that makes it a lot easier. So yeah, so now you could do fetch table and you could just do like calendar items, save many, right? Like we could do that kind of stuff inside of our service class. So that's good. Kind of what I like to use service classes for, is you can do this kind of logic, and then if you're not refreshing, then you're just fetching from the database. That wasn't you, Corey? Okay, it was somebody. gonna say it's you. You do lots of good work. All right, so we're gonna not refresh. We're just gonna read it of the database. We still have to wire up some more dependencies, so we have to go into our service container, which lives in our application class. So we're gonna go into application. We're gonna find services, which is down here, and what we need is to get to the other window there, and we need to go application. It's gonna pull a bunch of stuff out of pre-baked code. All right. Okay, so first we're going to add the client, then we're going to attach the calendar service and the client together. So we need to add some imports. Do use CakePHP client. And we're going to use a lot. Use is like app service. Calendar service, right? So now we have the calendar service wired up. Okay, sure. Okay, so now we've wired up our dependency container and added our arguments. So all of that should work. So then when our controller runs, CakePHP will know how to like wire everything together. It will add the LSP state. Yeah, it will. Because I pasted the code in, it doesn't add the use statements, but it could. I'm just rushing around and being silly. Okay, so now we've got the JSON view. JSON view we don't have to build. It's custom JSON view we do need to build. And so what I also want to show today is a way to approach serialization that isn't just building on top of the entity to JSON. I like entity to array. I think the entity methods that allow an entity to be serialized into JSON are great. They're awesome for getting started. They're awesome for like quick and dirty APIs. But as an application matures, you're often going to want to like have custom serialization, right? You're going to want to be able to build endpoints that have thoughtful ways to serialize. Maybe you don't want to just like serialize your whole schema into the API response. Sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of a layer between what the API exports and what your database schema actually is. And so if you're just serializing entities, a lot of that logic ends up in your domain entities, and it's hard to make sense of how that all works. And it's also hard for me, I find it hard to control what entities get serialized. So you load up a big association change, like do your APIs really need to load up all of that data and then serialize it all? Another thing that I find is hard to do with entity serializers is having the client like incrementally expand entities, right? So having an API that like loads a whole big tree of entities maybe is pretty wasteful. Maybe the client doesn't need all of that data. Maybe they just need the top level or one layer down. And so some people solve this with GraphQL. If you want to use GraphQL, that's your own thing. But if you're in the REST world, an approach to solve this is using query parameters to request like object expansion. And so that's kind of the approach we're going to go down now. And yeah, that's what we're going to do. So to do that, we need a view class. So we need like a custom, we're going to call it custom JSON view just because names are hard and I couldn't think of anything better. So we have that custom JSON view. Okay. This class is going to be a little bit big. So we'll go through it piece by piece. So we got some headers. This is boring. We're going to use configure. We're going to use serialize view, which is the base class for the JSON view and the XML view in the framework. And so we're going to use that base class to kind of build our own stuff. And our view class is going to also render out. It's going to respond to a specific content type. So we've chosen a custom content type. We could just attach this to JSON. But then this wouldn't be as much of a fun of a demo. And so then we're going to serialize data. So this serialize method is a hook that's provided by the framework. And then it lets you kind of like attach extra like choose the custom serialization. Yeah, so we're going to use some context. We're going to use something called the serializer. And so we're going to separate the entity serialization into a set of classes that just handle serialization, getting down to that separation of concerns. So we're going to have some sort of like a lookup that allows us to register entities and the serializer that handles them. And then we're going to go through and prepare all of all the values. And so what that lets us do, this prepare hook allows us to kind of like build extra context for our response. So if we needed to do joins, we could like eager load all of our joins here so that we don't have to have extra logic in our endpoints to do conditional joins or like eager load data. And this also lets us use the same serializer in multiple endpoints without having to worry about like, did we load all the right data? Did we do all the joins ahead of time? Like that can be a really like tedious development process where you have to like go back to the endpoint, add the contain, go back into the entity serializer, fix all of that. So what we can do instead is just eager load data inside the view, which some people will hate, but let's see how it goes. Okay, so if we're in a list, we're going to use the first one. We're going to assume a list is all the same. We're going to prepare it. If we're just serializing a single entity, we're going to find the serializer for that and then prepare the value, which is that eager load. And then we're going to serialize the value and then JSON encode the whole thing. So the output of this will be a bunch of arrays, and then we'll just turn all of those arrays into JSON. So this is a serializers class, which is all red. So let's look at that. So I've got the serializer interface. We got to get that in first because all the serializers are going to have the kind of the same interface. So we'll get that open, and then we'll get that code. Our interface for serializers has that prepare function, and then also has that serialize function. So we can convert a value into some sort of a JSON, something that works with JSON. Maybe it's a Boolean, maybe it's not. But that's what we're going to do. And then we need the actual serializers. So let's get those. That serializers registry, right? Because we have that in our custom JSON. This serializers map, that serializers kind of global that allows us to look up serializers. So we're going to call that serializers.php. And inside of this class, I'm going to map a bunch of basic types. This is mostly for like, for thoroughness. So we have a bunch of serializers, and then the way we interact with this is it only has kind of like a map and a get. We're kind of building like a global registry of serializers and the things they can serialize. I keep saying serialize a lot, but I don't have a better word. Okay, so it's a really simple like map. We unset any like built objects that we built, and we set the class for later. So we're not doing any work before we need to. And if we haven't built the class before, we build the serializer, and then we're done. So serializers should be stateless. If we share state in the serializer, then actually no, they shouldn't be stateless because everything gets blown up at the end of the request. Okay, so that's kind of how we were going to fish serializers in and out of application logic. Let's see what a serializer looks like. So I've chosen to just put serializers in their own directory. We're going to call this one calendar item. So let's look at a serializer. So calendar serializer uses the ORM, has some additional attributes, and then this is where we can do like our eager loading. So we talked about that prepare step before, where we load extra context for the response. So if there's an include and user is one of the included entities, what we're going to do is fish out all the user IDs and then load all the user IDs in one pass. You could do this with contain. Contain is a great way to do this. But what contain doesn't let you do is incrementally, you'd have to like pair logic in your controller endpoint with logic in your serializer. So you have to like maintain this lockstep of like what logic goes with what logic. And I found that kind of tedious to maintain. So this will emit more database queries because you can't do a join. However, for one-to-many relationships, the ORM can't do a join anyways. So you're not really losing any performance or like increasing database load this way. It would impact for one-to-one relationships. So it belongs to many or has one. Sorry, not belongs to many, belongs to or has one. It would change the query patterns. But for a has many or a belongs to many, this is a great way to load those entities. And then also, you can manage pagination. Maybe you don't want to load all 10,000 users. Yeah, not if you have a user to calendar item, you wouldn't load all of their calendar items. You could load just some of them. Maybe you don't offer that as an include. But we're doing that. I'd like to use assertions. You can use assertions to like reinforce runtime. Yeah, you could do load into. Yep. The tricky part with load into is that you can't fetch into a specific entity and then load into a specific entity. Well, you actually can load into a specific entity. Yeah, you could use load into. Yeah, you could use load into. That would be a better way to do it. So then we're going to do the serialization map. So we're just mapping the entity properties into the properties we want to have in their API. I've chosen that for this API, we're going to have camel case API variables, but the database has underscores. So this is a trivial example, but you could imagine like, renaming columns in the database, but maintaining backwards compatibility. So, you could have another old, maybe we called it begin time before, and then begin time was confusing to end users. So then we renamed it. So now we have like backwards compatibility. We can serialize the same value multiple times, which is a little bit more tricky to do in an entity serializer. You can do it, but then you have all this extra logic in your entities. And one thing you can't do with entity serializers is have multiple versions. So we have one set of serializers now, but we could have like a serializers v2 or serializers v3 or like different formats for or different content types for serializers. So yeah, then down here, if we have the users and the current users in the index, then we can load up that user and serialize them. And this is another neat thing we can do. So we have the user class. We can request a specific subclass of the serializer. We can load different kinds of serializers inside of here. So if we wanted to like not export, maybe we want to export a minimal version of a user as when it's embedded into another entity, we could do that as well. So we can load up a different type. So maybe we had like user minimal, right? We could do that in this scenario where we couldn't do that with entity serializers. So you can change how an object is serialized based on where it is in the tree of objects, which is kind of a neat benefit of this. So now we're going to need a user serializer. So our user serializer doesn't prepare any data because it doesn't load any extra stuff. And we still make sure our user is good. Why are there squiggles? Undefined type. Crazy. So yeah, we're just going to output the ID. We're going to string cast the IDs because in the future we might want to change our IDs into big ints, and JavaScript sometimes doesn't like big ints if they get big enough. Or maybe we want to change to UUIDs in the future. We don't know. So we can string cast IDs. It's kind of a nice practice because you can kind of pretend that it's a string without it actually being a string under the hood, in case you change your mind in the future. I'm going to look into that. And yeah, it's there. It's just being silly. Okay, last thing we need is that scalar serializer, which we don't use, but it's referenced in that serializer. We'll just comment it out. sometimes get screwed. Okay. Okay. So that's map. Okay. So now we are at a place where we have most of the stuff. Do I use assertions in production code? I like to, yeah. I like to use assertions because they let you type narrow. So if you're using an assertion and you're doing like static typing, Solm and PHP Stand will use assert methods to do type narrowing, which is really nice. So at the top here, if we like inspect with LSP, we can see, you know, it's mixed, but down here, it's now a user. So this helps with type analysis and helps you kind of build safer code because you can ensure you can do type narrowing. And if the type is not the right type, you'll get an exception, which is awesome because then you can catch the exception and fix it. And we'll talk about error handling in a little bit. Yeah, I use assertions in production code quite a bit. It's really good for invariance. Like if you have a condition that should never be reached, instead of just, you know, hoping it doesn't ever happen, you can put an assertion. Instead of having to like write additional logic, you can use an assertion. So yeah, assertions are also really good for development aids. And what we're considering doing for Cake is using assertions to do like developer experience stuff. So if you make a mistake and the framework could catch it and give you a better error, we can use assertions where we can't use a type check for that. So you might see more and more assertion errors coming out of Cake in the future. All right, so we've got our serializers, we've got our custom JSON view. Now we have to test this. And like I could spin up a server and run it, but that's not much fun. What I prefer to do is write test cases. So let's write some test cases for our controller. Just generate a test for that. Test type. I can never remember. Type is so it's controller. And then we want calendar items. Need to do everything. Type in the variable. Yeah, you could type it in. So in this specific scenario where we have a serializer bound to an interface, the interface can't have a type hint, right? If we added a type hint here, the interface would get cranky because, you know, you can have a type hint on the interface, but you need a type hint. You have to have the same type hint on an implementation as you do in the interface. So yeah, that's one reason you would want to use an assert over a type hint. But if you can use a type hint, you totally should use a type hint. I couldn't use a type hint in here because of the interface. The interface has to be dynamic and hold any kind of value. So assertion is really good for like when you have to accept mixed and you want to like narrow down mixed, or you want to, you know, ensure that mixed is not a type of thing, either for backwards compatibility or some sort of interface thing. Another way you could solve this is with more interfaces in PHP, right? Like you could make a serializable interface, but that still won't help you get down to like, is this actually a user or is this a calendar item? And so you're just trying to prevent like human derps is effectively, yeah, you can't narrow parameter types. Just make them bigger. We don't need that. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to delete all of this and we're going to do some tests on the controller. So we've got our data being loaded from our fixtures. We've got migrations will run automatically if we decide to change our schema. So the next thing to do is to write some tests. And I thought I wrote tests, and now I don't see them. Interesting. All right, we're just going to wing it. Index, so it's calendar item controller. Okay, so we have an index function, so we're going to load. Let's do with content type request. With content. I'm going to open up another computer because I'm flying blind right now. While I know the material, I don't know it that well. 1 second. Why is this also not working? Computers are conspiring against me. Do. Sorry, I forgot to push an update from my home computer. Do this presentation on my work computer because my home computer is Linux and I don't know how to do the, the video editing, the video stuff on Linux. Right? Linux is hard sometimes. Neat. Okay. Now we're in better shape. Turn screen lock. Okay. Do this the hard way. Yeah, I've had nothing but trouble with Central and Linux. Just like, yeah, it just doesn't want to work for me. And I wasn't going to try and risk it again. 2 CakeFests ago, I tried to present from Linux, and there was a very awkward thing where I got kicked out of Ring Central and couldn't get back in, and it was very stressful. So I don't want to do that anymore. So here we are. Okay, we're going to use locator. There we go. The LSP stuff works real good. Okay, and then we'll do a user. We'll fetch a user. We're going to make some. We have some calendar items already saved. All right, let's skip that. Okay, so now we need to make a test with, yeah, presenting from Linux should work. I just haven't gotten it to work on my machine. So that's the challenge. I'm sure it can be made to work. I just don't know how to do it, and I've not invested the time to do it. So we want to test with our content type. If you need to send content type headers, you can use config request. And what config request does is let you set additional headers, and we can look at a nicer way to do that in a minute. Set the accept header, and we're going to set it to content, to application, vnd.app plus JSON. That's kind of what that's going to let us send our custom header request. Test case already uses locator. Oh, look at that. Let's see if Adman's right. He probably is. He knows this stuff better than I do now. And then we're just going to do a get request on calendar items, right? Because that's what we want to get. We're just going to use the auto res for now. We're going to make sure the response is okay. Typing is the hardest. And then we're going to look at the body. So we're going to JSON decode the response body. So we're going to do, there's probably a better way to do this. Just the way my brain works, where I just access hidden properties that I know are there because I wrote the code. Maybe you can't escape locator. Yeah, locator is everywhere. It's good stuff. Okay, so we have the body, so we want to look at the first one. So we're going to look at body, and then our view is going to, because our controller is serializes to calendar items. So that's what we're going to look for. Calendar items, right? We're going to pick the 0th one, and And then we're just going to do some light assertions on this. So let's look at our fixture. Calendar items fixture. I'm just going to add another record in here. Static data in fixtures is another point of contention. Static data in fixtures gets inserted at the beginning of every single test. And so what I see sometimes people doing is trying to handle like multiple different scenarios or different test configurations because they want to have, they have different test scenarios they need to cover. And then they try and use static data in fixtures for that. And it ends up going not so great. So what I would recommend is the static data in your test fixtures should be as minimal as possible and only cover like the very basics. Like if your application always needs a single user, like put that in a static fixture. That makes sense. But for the rest of the data, fixture factories are where you want to look. And so there's a fixture factories plugin from Verge Noir, and I recommend using that. Or if you don't want to use a library, you can make your own fixture factory methods, and that is another solution that you can use. And we can cover like if we have time, we'll show how to do that. How to do the custom one. The fixture factories is just use it. It works really well. But if you don't want to use fixture factories because you don't want more dependencies, there's reasons, but yeah, there are ways to solve that. So we're going to call it Hi CakeFest. Called it Hi CakeFest. And so we're just going to make sure that the descriptions match. First description. The other thing we're going to make sure is that third array is it not has key. We're going to make sure that first does not have a user, right? Because we didn't request that specifically, so we're going to make sure that it's not there. Looks like I got the method name right too. Cool. Okay, so now we should be able to run this. It'll either work perfectly or it'll be a big mess of errors. Either way, we'll have some fun. 404. So 404, controller class could not be found. Really? It's right here though. Why do you do this to me, Cake? Why? Calendar items in the get. Yeah, that's what it's supposed to be. The error, oh, it's got a 500. 500's bad. Let's look at 500s. What is in the response? Just, debug. What did we forget? You folks didn't do anything. It's all me. Let's see what we got. Stack trace. We're just going to read through all of this code really quickly. This is a lot. We're going to turn this off. Let's do the next thing. Disable error handler middleware. Turn that error handler middleware off so we get to see the exception. Nope. Okay. Am I running the wrong test? Let's just run the one test. Uh, 500 is not between 200 and 400. Okay, so there's a 500 that's not escaping the middleware. Shot for each error. Oh no, my tolerance is so low. We'd get through like one and I'd be done. It would not be a good day. Okay, so we're getting an error. Why are we getting an error? Let's just uncomment this. And we're just going to substring the first 200. Another Mark's dumb and doesn't know how to use computers, so this is how he solves problems. Yeah, it's not a string, but it could be a string if you thought about it hard enough. Okay, so it says custom view class. Oh, so that's probably something like we spend this to 250. The view class is not found. Custom JSON view, yeah, it's right here. Why can't you find it? App view, custom JSON view. Calendar items controller. right there. Why can't you find it? Okay, so why can't it see it? Custom view cannot be seen. View. Any clever ideas, chat? Okay, app view, custom JSON view. Looks good. That looks good. This looks good. Okay, what's the stack trace on this? Love stack traces, but this one is not helping. Okay, so what do we get? We're getting possibly rated serialization failure. Serialization of view data failed. Oh, I hate that error. It's the worst error. This made me so angry that I changed how exception reporting works in 4.5. This is one of my least favorite errors in Cake. So if you have a problem with serializing a view using serialized view, it just gives you this garbage error and doesn't actually show you the error that's chained underneath. So I've been working on improving chained exceptions because this thing drives me up the wall. So we're just going to go into the core and just hack this stuff up. Serialized. Let's see, where is that error? It's right here. So what we're going to do here is debug get message. Now, you think it's the ID? It could be the ID. Sometimes SQLite doesn't care. Try that before we do. Nope, it didn't like that either. Unknown serializer for count. Oh, yeah. Just gonna leave that debug in there because we'll need it again. SQLite doesn't really get too fussy about some things. If you just want it to do, it sometimes works. Anyways, the primary key could have been an issue. It might have dropped the insert. The bigger problem is that we forgot to connect the things together. So inside our table init, so what we forgot to do is tell the serializer mapping which serializer goes with which entity. So that's what we forgot to do. And so what we have to do instead is connect the two pieces. And so what we need to do is, then we're just going to do serializers. Thing, and we're going to map calendar class to dots. Okay, so we're going to connect these two things together. All of our imports got done for us. So what we've done now is connected the two classes together. So now that the serializer mapping knows, when I need to serialize a calendar item, I need to also, this is the serializer that goes with it. So we're going to do the same thing for our users table. Be annoying about it. Now we've connected the user serializer to the user. If we go back into tests, serializer interface not found. All right, making progress. Can't even copy paste code. Just the worst. Just the worst. Okay, so it says this doesn't exist. Clearly it does. Calendar item serializer on line 12. Yeah, it does exist because we can see it right here. Yeah, it's right there. Okay, so why doesn't it think it exists? It's right there, app view, serializer interface. All right, so we fixed it. Copy paste is hard, right? It's so hard sometimes to copy paste. I hope that I'm not the only one who does these kinds of dumb things. That's my hope. Is that at least through this, you get a lens into like how my brain works and how bad I am at computers sometimes. Okay, so let's look at our body. So they're both High Cake Fest. That's neat. We're looking at the description. We need to look at the title. Okay, so we win. We got there. Good job. We did it, everybody. Okay, so now we've got the calendar items coming down and serializing. But what we don't have is we haven't tested our includes. So let's do that next. All right, so now we're going to do with an include. So we're going to do include equals user. Okay, so we're going to do our same kind of custom thing, and then we're going to do include user. So if we go back to our controller, what we're going to do is get that controller. We're going to do includes. We're going to do the list of includes. We're just going to cast it to an array. Thing we're looking for is include. So now we got that, and what we want to do is pass this as a serializer item. There'll be more errors, don't worry. If there's one thing I know, is I will screw up for sure, especially when everybody's watching. It's the best time to screw up, right? Okay, so now we're going to pass this context down. Everybody hates errors. Bugs are the worst. If only we didn't program, there would be no bugs. So we're going to pass this down, and what that's going to do is it's going to go into our custom view class. This is another like interesting thing. I think view classes are really underutilized in applications, and I wanted to give this workshop topic as a reason to like skip creating bugs. I wish. Oh, my kingdom to be able to skip that part. Okay, so we're going to get that context. We're going to pass that context into all of our serializers. So remember we had that calendar serializer. Where did it go? So now when we have an include, we're going to kind of like have this informal kind of API between the serializers and between the controller endpoints. That include allows us to like incrementally load things. So that's the pattern we're going to follow. If we were building a bigger API, maybe we want to like put some more shape around this and have more formal interfaces for that. But yeah, that's what we're going to do. So our test failed, which is awesome, because it should fail because I copied and pasted the test. Right, and I copy and pasted the test. Copy and pasted the test with the assertion. Here's the test. So I said that the array does not have the user key. So now I'm going to make it into just a has, right? So we're just going to delete that, and now the test passed. And so what we want to do next is make some assertions on that usership. So we want to do some good stuff like assert array not has key. And we want to make sure there's no password in here. That would be bad. If we leaked passwords, that would be not great. Especially, we would be leaking the hashes of the passwords, but you know, either way, it's not good. We don't want to do that. Okay, so we're still good. And what we can do next is like equals. We'll just call this username CakeFest. Okay. And so we're going to put this as CakeFest. First user. Interesting. His name is CakePHP. I forget to. No. Save the file. Okay, so now what we've got is we can dump that first record out so we can see it. So that's what our serialization looks like. We could also exclude or include additional entities. And so that's kind of like separating the API serialization from the entities, and then also using custom content types. So that's kind of how the new content type negotiation system works. Another thing we can do, which would be kind of neat, is what if we could accept that custom content type and then save with that custom content type? That'd be kind of neat, right? And so let's do that. We'll do that pretty quick. So let's try to test for it first. Fingers are getting ahead of my brain. 20 minutes left. Okay, I'll give Chad a choice. We can either go through this simple update, or what we can do is work on something else. We can do some error monitoring, can do any of that kind of stuff. Just gonna check the calendar. Oh no, we've got 50 minutes left. Let's do both. Maybe we can do both. Let's try and speed run this. So we're gonna use our same thing. And we're gonna enable CSRF tokens. So we don't have to deal with that. We don't have any authentication. I'm gonna assume that in a real world application, you would have authentication. Hopefully, you'll use one of the other workshops today to, I know that authentication is being covered in one of the other workshops. So follow that. I'm skipping that because this is a demo. Demos, we don't have authentication. Well, not in this demo. ID. This doesn't work yet because I have the wrong things on it. So get an item. This French. We're going to cheat because we know the number. Okay, so now we got a post. Now we got to send some data in. I'm just going to do title is updated. We're going to change the start time. 2022, 29. It to today. So we have 2029, so let's set it to Halloween. Okay, so we're going to switch it to Halloween. Note that we're using that camel case name from the API, which doesn't match what the ORM would use. And then we're just going to do insert response is okay. Semicolon. Reload the item from the database. The item's title. That's the start time. Wednesday. That's the right format. It's been a while since I've formatted date times. Okay, so this test will most certainly fail. Wonderful. Failed in the perfect way. The whole thing doesn't exist. So now we've got this controller. My other machine, because I forgot to push the changes. I can't push them because I rebased the changes, which I'll get fixed after the workshop. Update. So we're going to do int of ID, and then we're going to get our calendar service. Another interesting thing that changed in recent Cake releases is you can do typed scalar parameters. So this is really helpful if you have like ID values and some jokers decide to send you strings. You can have CakePHP will automatically cast them to the right type. So it'll take your past ID parameter, apply an int cast to it. If the int cast fails, the framework will throw an exception. So this allows you to get rid of some additional type checks in your application code. You can just enforce it with a type check. And yeah, you can register custom resolvers if you want. So what we're going to do is do this. We're going to get the item. Just going to come from our calendar service. Update the ID. We're going to pass in. I'm just going to pass the whole request data in. We're going to update that item. We'll set that as calendar item right to our view, and then we can, this. Calendar item. So now we're going to serialize that, and we can catch any exceptions that come in out of that. We can just render error, and we can just get the types could be better on this. For now, we're just going to work with what we got. We're going as quick as we can. Calendars. Yeah, you're right. It is calendars update. Okay, there's no update method yet, so let's build that next. There's going to be an int of an ID and then an array data. Right. Okay, so we're going to update the data with the ID. And then we're going to get the item. It's going to come from Serializer. So we're going to do serializers get, and we're going to do calendar item, calendar item plus, and we're going to do parse. This is a new method we're adding to our serializer. It's going to parse the data into an entity. That's what we're going to do next. And then if the item has errors, a runtime exception. You can throw, throw a validation error. I haven't written that yet, but we'll get there. 52 is missing. What's 52 is missing? Line indented correctly. Oh boy, I'm just gonna erase the whole screen. I think it's mad because I haven't finished everything off yet. It's missing an equals. There we go. Thank you. Get that import done for us. Okay. Validation error. We'll just change this to runtime exception for now. It'd be better to have better types. And then what we're going to do is do this calendar items save, or fail. Pass that item in. And if that works, we're going to return the item. Okay. So that's kind of the gist. This parse method is going to parse and validate the calendar item. So it's going to apply our validation. It's going to load the entity. It's going to load. It's going to load the entity, do the validation, and then that's why we're checking errors when the item comes out of that parse. Okay, so we need to go back to our serializer or interface. We need to add in a parse method. And that parse method is going to look like public function parse. It's going to take an array of data and an array of options, which we're not using, but we might use in the future. So now we need a parse function. So now we're getting a lot closer to having API format both in and out. A service is more like a repository pattern. It can be. You can use services to do a bunch of things. I like to use services as like a catch-all bucket for application logic. So they can coordinate between remote services and your ORM entities. They can do stuff like coordinate between updating database entities and then queuing, firing queue jobs, updating Elasticsearch indexes, updating other coordinating changes between multiple data stores if you have that. I'm not a big fan of callbacks, like ORM callbacks ORM callbacks. I've been burned by them too many times. You use them and then it turns into this like tangled ball of mud. So I try to avoid ORM callbacks unless it's something that's always going to apply. Like people try and put conditional logic in ORM callbacks, and to me, I found that gets really tricky to manage as time progresses and the application complexity increases. ORM callbacks start to feel a lot less good. So yeah, I use services to put all that together. So that's just like reading a method from the top to the bottom. You know everything that happens. Updates are really easy. Following the application control flow is really straightforward because you're just reading the code from top to bottom. Yeah, so that's how I like to use services. They can be used as repositories. Yeah, there's different ways to approach the problem. So this is going to look a little bit like an ID. What we want to do is fetch it. So we're going to do item is equal to right. We're going to just load that up. Okay, or don't. Don't help me autocomplete. Okay, so we're going to do that. If we don't have an ID, we're going to assume that we're creating a new one. So we're going to do item table new empty entity. So we're going to create an empty entity. And then what we're going to do is we're going to update that item. So we're going to do item is equal to table patch entity. We'll keep passing the item post data, and then we're going to update the options. Options gives you a good place. The options array and the guts of this parser give you a really great place to put in like field allow lists or field ban lists where you don't want to allow fields or you don't want to or you want to allow certain fields. So instead of having that all in your controller logic, you can tuck it away into the service or into these serializers, then you have a way to say, like, we expect this API format to come in. Here's the fields that are allowed to it. So it gives you a nice way to kind of glue all that like API endpoint, parsing and marshalling logic all in one place. So that's another benefit of this kind of an approach. We can do stuff with like serializing the user. If we wanted to do that, we can do that later. Now we're just going to focus on our primary workflow. So that's all we really need to update our test. Right, so that's kind of our, so now our parse method is done. We have to build a user serializer to build a parse method on that. Okay. Now we should get closer to a path. Okay, we forgot to define our cool little route. So before all of this, we're going to do builder. We're going to do post. So we're going to use the route helpers to make it so that this endpoint can only be requested by post. We're also going to adopt a kind of an approach where we use the new route templates. So if you've not switched over to using curly braces in your routes, I highly recommend you do that because the colon stuff is going away. The reason colons are going away in route templates is they're a pain in the butt to regex because we don't know where the parameters end. It also stops you from using colons in your routes. And there have been some use cases in the past where people want to use colons in their routes. So yeah, if you're using colons in your routes, switch them to curly braces because the colons won't work for long. Okay, and we're also going to use another somewhat recent feature, which is being able to define the route destination or the route target with a string. So this does incur a little tiny bit of overhead as the framework has to parse out the contents of what this means and map it into a controller and an action in the plugin or a prefix. But I think it's worth it. In a very large application, that cost could get higher. You might want to split down two arrays. And then we're going to pass in the ID so that it gets passed as a route parameter. What's the problem now? Possibly related to, yes, default routes are kicking in. We put this before the fallbacks. That. Did I miss an R again? Calendar items. That was right. Oh, it's calendar. Thank you. Serialization of view data failed. Oh, my favorite error of all time. Too few arguments found to calendar item serializer prepare passed in custom JSON found too. All right, so now we're into more bugs that I wrote previously. Let's look at the line number. Line number is on 41. Fixed it. Okay, so what happened is it did not do any updates. That's cool. I wonder why. So it updated the title, but did not update the start time. We can. Okay, so let's go and look at our parser. Item serializer. So we're just passing in the full data, which is not going to work the way we want it to. We're not renaming the columns. Yeah. So at this point, we would have to do some massaging of data. What we need to do some massaging of is this kind of stuff. And so what we want to do is like if, you know, set time, that was data start time, do data start time, and we want to unset the other one into our endpoints. We'll do the same thing for end time. Obviously, if you're doing this in a larger scenario, you would want to like templatize this and make it logic that you can more easily reuse. Because right now it's just kind of a big hot mess. I have another 500. The 500 is unknown serializer type or string. My string. You. String. And the stack trace on that is custom JSON serializing a view. What? Why is it serializing a string? Serializer that. We're not getting to here? Oh, we're probably in here. What is the error? So many errors. Wait, let's just add a serializer for string. Yeah, it's because yeah, I think you're right. This. Just add that scalar serializer in. Serial. No. There we go. Not even close. No, that's right. Yeah, that looks good. You're right, it doesn't. This abstraction is kind of falling down a bit because everything's arrays, but maybe we'll be able to make it work. Okay, so nothing got updated now. That's neat. Look at data. The data looks right. That looks good. Title, start time. Why doesn't it update? Oh, I saw an error. In start time, the date time. Oh, it's a date time value. So, a couple interesting problems that are going on now. We're not getting any exceptions from the service. So we go into something. This should be throwing an exception in here. Yeah, so it's should be throwing an exception. Oh, the controller doesn't change the response code. Doing the lovely has an error, return to code 200, which is the worst. With status 400 in there. Okay, so now we have a validation error, which is good. So now we can go into our test case controller, and we'll just improve this to have a time. 12. All right, we got there. Okay, so that's kind of an example of how you can use serializers that exist outside of your entities to do validation, to parse your incoming request format that is the same as the API format you serialize to, and have it all kind of work cohesively and abstract all of that away from like the ORM and from the entities. So you can kind of have like API logic separate from that. And one of the nice things about separating it is it does feel a little bit heavy at times, but one of the nice benefits of doing it that way is that you can swap it out. So if you have different versions of your API, you can swap them out. If you have different serialization formats, you can swap those out. If you want to change custom content types, you can do all of that as well. Yeah, so that's kind of the goal with that. And then next, I wanted to talk about some of the improvements we've been making to error handling. Full disclosure, I work at a company called Sentry, and we do error monitoring as a service, so it's going to demo that. With that said, the error monitoring I'm going to show can be used with any hosted error monitoring service or with your own internal stuff. I'm going to demonstrate Sentry because I think it's one of the better products, primarily because I work on it and I think it's a good service. One of the other reasons I would like to show Sentry versus one of the competitors is if you want to, you can self-host Sentry. It's a great way to get started and to maintain your own infrastructure if you want to, if you don't want to pay for SaaS, or if you want to just read a whole mountain of Python code. And so the way that those kind of monitoring services get attached into Cake is we're going to build an error handler. And so not an error handler because we kind of replaced the error handling system in 4.4. It kind of got rebuilt. And so what we're going to do instead is build one that forwards all of our errors and our exceptions to a hosted service. Because that'll be easier. And then we get some benefits from that. We get some aggregation. We don't have to read log files. So this is also one of the big changes in 4.4 is we rebuilt error handling and exception handling so that they kind of have the same kind of global interface and have the same extension points now. So both errors and exceptions can have the rendering swapped out. So you can swap out the rendering for HTML. You can swap out the rendering for errors. Sorry, you can swap the rendering for errors to be HTML or to console, or you can do the same thing for exceptions. You can render to HTML, you can render to console, and all of the defaults that you're used to in Cake historically are still available and still all work. But what is different is the rendering classes, can be used in both places, and the logging is the same now. So it's the same logger for logging errors that it is for logging exceptions. The interface is a little bit clunky because we had to maintain backwards compatibility. But but that's just the present. One of the other improvements that we added in 4.4 was how errors are modeled. So in the past, you get like the 5 parameters. You don't get a stack trace, which sucks. So now when Cake gives you an error, like a PHP error, like a notice error, a warning, or an error fatal, not an error fatal, a fatal, like a notice or a warning or an error, you get it as an object versus like a bunch of scalar values that don't work really well. And that object implements similar interfaces to exceptions. So it doesn't implement the throwable interface because it's not throwable, but it does implement the same method names. So that's kind of a nice benefit of that. Okay, so we're just going to start from scratch. Clear. Namespace. Error. I'm going to use Cake. Use Cake. Keep typing user instead of use. It's just wired to type that. Is that PHP error class I told you about? Yeah, there's no any settings for strict types, I know. We need to use PSR request because exceptions come with requests sometimes. The sometimes is because not all applications run all of their code in an HTTP interface. So yeah, you don't always get a server request. And we need runtime exception. Runtime exception. And we need throwable. And we're going to do type. What we want to do is not only log to the remote service, but we also want to log to local logs. I think local logs are still really important. If there's a network problem, then at least you still have local logs. So we're going to pass in array. So we're still going to use the private logger. Not private logger. We're going to use the standard error logger, which logs to files or logs to syslog based on your application's config. And then we're going to have some of the backwards compatibility methods. So we have to have these, otherwise the interface will get all cranky. We have interface is null. That's all we got there. It returns a boolean. It doesn't do return boolean because we're just going to throw exceptions. And just don't use this. We got a big note on that. We're going to do the same thing for log message. Log message has the terrible interface that I don't like, which is level string for message, array for context, which doesn't even work in PHP 8.1 because it got broken, because reasons that I don't understand, but it's gone. So if you were using the context of exceptions, or of PHP errors, it's now gone. So what we're going to do next is we're going to implement the new interface. Reasons, yeah. The PHP change set for that wasn't really clear on why, other than it's a bad idea. but we were using it. At least Cake was using it. We have a server request. A server request interface, which is a request. And then one of the other changes in the interfaces you get is that whether or not you should include a stack trace based on the application configuration is now passed as a parameter. This just helps loggers be a little bit more simple because you don't have to like check the config and read the trace config and figure out what that trace config should be. You just have to log the exception. And now loggers don't have to return anything, which is nice, because returning from a log is kind of strange in the first place. I'm just going to log to our internal logger. Which is kind of our super method. Right. And then we're going to do capture exception. Is exception. We're going to do the same thing for message, log error, sorry. Log error, this one takes a PHP error, takes a request, gets a trace. This is kind of one of the nice things with that, the way the interfaces are kind of designed to look the same. In the future, building an error logger will just require you to build log exception and log error. You don't have to do the rest of the stuff. Error. Message. Severity. Not all errors are important. I'll need one more of those. Okay. So it's mad that I don't have. So the name of the package. I think I would know this. Yeah, central SDK. Okay. It's just complaining about documentation. Pretty sure it's there. Logger, logger. Logger, log exception, log error. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, so now we want to wire up our credentials. So we're going to go into Bootstrap, and we're just going to attach it at the bottom, or at the top, I guess. Doesn't really matter. Just put it at the bottom. Entry limit. Okay, so we're just going to read the configuration values out of configure. So what that looks like in here, we're just going to do this entry string because it's hard. This the way Sentry does credentials is through this concept of a DSN. And what DSNs are is basically just like an API key. It's going to log into an account and get the key. Okay, and not show you my work stuff. Okay, let's get key. Actual. Switch share to the screen. Camera. General settings. Okay, so we're inside Sentry. This is one of my personal accounts. I set this up for CakePHP, so this is my personal account. And then we have some projects. I made one for CakePHP, and then the DSN is what's also known as a client key. And so it's just this big thing. These are publicly shareable. They will allow for JavaScript projects, there's a bit more configuration that you need to do. So what I've done now is just connected that into Sentry. And so when our application raises an error, what's going to happen is we'll get an error inside of here. So it's going to switch screens again. Which one is it? Let's try this one. Multiple windows. Interesting. Okay, so you should be able to see Firefox and the editor. Now we put that DSN inside of here. I've lost chat somehow. Yeah, chat has disappeared. Okay, we'll find chat somewhere. Okay, so now if our application was to raise an exception when it was running, we would get an error inside of Sentry. We can set up the environment. This is the dev environment. Environments that help you like partition events by where you're deploying your application. And we'll just set up a release. So releases are ways of like when you do a deploy, you name a release, and this lets you track bugs that are created as releases are deployed, which is pretty helpful because then you can know when you do a deploy if you've introduced new bugs, and you can also attach more workflow to that. Release names can be anything. I would avoid using space or the empty string as your release name. Things will happen to you. Okay, so now if we were to go into the live server, or we'll just make a command line tool. Command line tools are fun. So bin cake bugs, bake command, and the command is bugs. So we'll go into our bugs command. Bugs command. What we're going to do here is we're just going to load up that calendar service again. We need to do that in the constructor. Calendar service. Okay. So we don't get dynamic property errors. That's a use case of like how to use your services in command line tools. That's what I'm trying to get to. So you can use those same services we built that contain our application logic, and we can put them into command line tools. We can put them into cron jobs. We can put them into queue jobs, all that kind of stuff. Guess my API key based on my keystroke. I don't know about that. From levels. So we're just going to do throw new runtime exception. Favorite exception. This went poorly. And it'll say, yep, 0 passed. That's a good plug. And so we should be able to see that inside of Sentry, or not. There it is. So yeah, so Sentry can, or any type of error monitoring system beyond just logs. Normally you'd have to like look at the logs, or you'd have to like build something that reads logs. I'm a big fan of like hosted error monitoring systems because they can alert you when new errors are encountered. And more importantly, they allow you to do things like set context. So you can add more context based on what you would have normally. So here we have the stack trace, which is wonderful. You could get that in a log file. It's a little bit annoying to do. But what's more interesting is we got the server name, we got the release, we got what version of PHP I'm running, and then we can also add like custom attributes. So you can add attributes for your application. You can add like your customer ID or your account ID, or what operation was being done, and then you can segment things and track down which user these bugs have impacted. If you want to get a hold of those users, or if you have a support issue come in, or someone tweets at you and says my account's broken, they get to give you, you can get their email address and then use that to find bugs, and you can find out the whole stack trace. You can also capture like local variables in some platforms. So like in JavaScript, you can not in JavaScript, in Python, you can capture stack trace. You can capture all the local variables from the stacks. I think you can do it in PHP as well. So yeah, you can get all of the arguments all the way through the whole stack trace, which is something you can't do with logs. Can we use service in place of custom classes? Yeah, you can put custom classes in the model folder. You can put them in the service folder. I'm a big proponent of doing custom classes. Yeah, custom classes are awesome. Hopefully I get the right term. Nope. 4 terminals open with the same name. There we go. Okay, so that's kind of a quick little demo of how you can how quickly you can get hosted monitoring, error monitoring hooked up, and then more importantly, how you can tie it into the framework in a way that doesn't impact the rest of your application. So it's kind of self-contained. It will capture uncaught exceptions and errors, making debugging a lot easier, because debugging in production is hard. Yeah. So yeah, I'll be around for a little bit more this afternoon. That's kind of all the content I've got prepared. So yeah, that's kind of the tutorial and demo and workshop. Thanks for listening and paying attention. Hope the rest of your CakeFest goes well, and yeah, that's everything.